Tourism Improvement District is when a group of hotels get together in a destination and they put together a plan to drive more business and more demand to their hotels. They put that plan together, implement it by assessing themselves a fee per occupied room for a pot of money that they then manage themselves. This has been happening for over 20 years across the country. We have districts in 19 states, over 195 of them to date. And it's been working really well across the country for this purpose. This would be the first by-state tourism improvement district, Illinois and Iowa combined. So it'd be pretty historic and the first in both states as well.
So this mechanism really exists as a result of these two concepts: the funding sufficiency and funding stability of tourism destination marketing. So because I typically do this presentation from my kitchen island and I don't get to engage with folks, I'm going to ask some interactive questions and hope that you talk back to me. Why is marketing important? What does marketing do for our businesses? It generates money. And we, in corporations, typically they develop marketing budgets based on what? If you're developing a marketing budget, say
return on investment.
yes, yes. Any other thoughts?
Percentage of revenue.
Yes, that's the answer I was looking for. Okay, so we have a goal of how much money we want to make, right? We have to make a certain amount of money, and so generally our marketing budgets are reflective of that. How do we in tourism decide how much money we're going to spend on marketing? Is it a percentage of the revenue that we produce? No, it's not. It's not, for a number of reasons. So our tourism marketing funding is generally funded by bed taxes. You're all familiar with this concept. Bed taxes are used for other expenditures other than tourism marketing, various, and that's everywhere. That's not just here, that's everywhere. And so because of that, the money that we generate, only a small fraction is actually invested in room night generation activity. And so because of that, it is inadequate in order to produce the amount of impact that we need. And so this concept evolved really as a direct result of that. So what is a TID? Is anyone here familiar with a business improvement district? Yes, good. Awesome, that's so great. Okay, a bid. Bids have been around for 50 plus years. They started in the 60s. There are around 2,500 in all 50 states. They have been thriving for a very long time. Business improvement districts are where property owners get together. They decide they need new and supplemental services above and beyond what the city already provides, and they decide to self-assess themselves a fee to provide for a new funding stream. Essentially, the best way I can describe it is it's a legal homeowners association for businesses, essentially. But it's all businesses that reside within a particular downtown. So generally, these areas are pretty obvious. If you step inside a bid, they're generally a little cleaner, a little prettier. They have unified signage, things of that nature. And so a group of hoteliers about 20 years ago in West Hollywood, California, identified the bid model as a good model for supplementing tourism marketing funding. And they formed the very first T-bid. So it's the same concept, except there's a couple of key differences. So in a bid, all the property owners within a defined geography decide to self-assess themselves. In a TID, it's still defined geography, but it's a bit broader, and we're only assessing one classification of business, and that 95% of the time is just lodging businesses. So the hotel owners get together and decide they need new revenue for supplementing their marketing efforts, and they decide amongst themselves to self-assess themselves a percentage of their sales in order to fund these marketing efforts. Another key difference between a bid and a TID is in a BID, the assessment really hits the property owner in the pocket. They really have no means of passing that on. In a TID, we do pass it on to the customer. It's a line item in the guest room folio. It looks a lot like bed tax on your guest room folio, but the legal differences are significant. Another key difference that I'd like to call out is in the BID, the property owners manage their plan. So they put together a plan that they pass amongst themselves. There's a plan that guides their district expenditures. And they need a governing body to execute that plan for them. So they form a nonprofit, and the board is made up of stakeholders, of business owners that reside within the property bid bounds. And the TID, we already have a nonprofit that does the work around executing a hotel owner's plan. And that is our Destination Marketing Organization, our CVB. And so we don't form a new nonprofit because it doesn't make sense to do that, but we do form a separate governing body because our CVB still has a large scope of work to do. They still have to impact the destination as a whole. And so a governing body made up of hotel owners then is made to direct the expenditures of the plan that the CVB then executes on their behalf. So I just explained this again, but I'm just going to one more time roll through this for you. The hotel pays the assessment. Again, a line item in the guest room folio collected by the customer. It's remitted back to the local government. The local government is involved in this process for a couple of reasons. Any idea why we involve the local government in this? If we are a bunch of business owners and we want to self-assess ourselves, why do we need the government? Any ideas? Yeah, there's that piece. Okay, good. Was there another offering? I heard a couple voices. The government is a professional in the space of making sure that the district does what it says it's going to do. Okay, so when you put this district plan together, you put it together and you decide you want to set a certain assessment rate, you want to make sure that the money is spent on these particular items, it's just the hotels in these particular cities, and this is the governing board. There is a formal process that we go through at the local level to solidify that, and we solidify that for a term. So these districts are not in place forever, so unlike bed taxes, they have a term, and the government makes sure that that plan is adhered to for the term. In addition, the government is the professional in the space of collection and enforcement. And so once we have a district in place, once the hotels have agreed to move forward, they also make sure that the district is adhered to from a collection standpoint as well. These districts ensure that there are no free riders. Is there any organizations in the crowd that are membership driven? You have membership?
It's a hybrid.
It's a hybrid, but so you have some membership dues for your organization?
In our case, we're part of the chamber, so the chamber is its own
Okay.
membership, but the other part is not.
Okay, so chambers are a good example. So chambers are typically membership driven, right? So membership models can be a little difficult. Why are they difficult? Because a business owner that decides they want to be part of the chamber, if they have some leadership change or dynamics change, they sometimes decide they no longer want to be part of that chamber, and it makes it really difficult to continue a reliable revenue stream. So these districts are compulsory, which means all folks that reside within the bounds must pay in for the term of the district. So some key differences between our existing model for funding tourism marketing and tourism improvement district and the assessment model. Differences between taxes and assessments. Anyone have any offering of that? What is the difference between a tax and an assessment? The words are kind of used interchangeably, but they're very different lately. Any idea? Nobody from the government's even offering this side.
Yes,
Come on, guys.
be voluntary.
The initiation process is voluntary. Once it's imposed, it's not voluntary. The legal underpinnings of taxes and assessments are very different. Taxes, once they are levied, they are not required to benefit the payer. They're not legally required to benefit the payer. You might have legislation that gives intention to it, but there's no legal requirement that the expenditure benefit the person or the business that actually pay into it. Assessment is different. An assessment, a special benefit assessment model, requires that the payer, so the lodging business, benefits proportionately to the amount that they pay in. It's a legal requirement, which is why these districts are different than taxes. And that's Somebody asked me earlier, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, why would you just not do another tax? And this is one of the key differences. Another key difference is these districts have a specific term and plan. So our business owners can really define what these district funds are used for, how much the assessment is. You can change the assessment midterm, you can lower it, you can raise it, and the stakeholders have the ability to do that. And they also can outline the authorized expenditures. If there's an expenditure on the list, it has to be adhered to. If there is a request for funding for an expenditure that's not on the list, it is illegal to spend the money on that expenditure. That is a security blanket for the industry. TIDs are managed and approved by those who are paying the assessment. There is an actual approval process required with these districts. Once a plan is put together, the stakeholders have to approve it in order for it to move forward through the reasonable process. They're legally accountable to a district plan. So again, those district plan accompanies a formation ordinance at the local level, becomes local law, so it cannot be deviated from for the term of the district. Your baseline funding and services are protected through this process. Baseline funding and services related to our bed taxes. And so right now we have a bed tax model funding these efforts. We want to make sure that we solidify that as the baseline funding model and that these funds are used solely as a supplemental funding stream. And so there is an element of that incorporated into the formation process that solidifies that. These funds are legally protected and politically protected. So you have a term and a plan in place for a certain amount of time. Let's say at the outset, it's 5 or 7 years. Regardless of what happens at the local level, our elected officials change, there's no opportunity for that plan to change during that period of time. Another security blanket for the industry is there is a procedure to dissolve these districts midterm. So if you form one for 5 to 7 years and you find 3 years in that it's not working as hotel owners and operators, there's a procedure to petition the jurisdiction to dissolve the district. Some eligible TID revenue expenditures. These are some of the expenditures that some of our TIDs are using. Groups, meetings, incentives. I would say number one is the sexiest on the list. We have a lot of need for this. We have a lot of our communities that don't have enough money to compete in their space. They cannot afford to bid on a piece of business. I know you all just hosted a really big women's basketball event. I'm going to make an assumption that cost you some money. Yeah, and sometimes that fee is really high, and if you just don't have the funds, you can't play in the space. Group commissions and rebates. Do you all play in sports? Sports teams generally require some rebate back to the managing organization. Do your hotels have to build that into their room rates and then pay it when some do? Guess what? This district can pay that for you. So we have some fear sometimes that if we add a fee to our hotel room folio, it's going to put us out of competition with our other cities that we compete with. And that is a valid concern, by the way. There is a limit to how much we can charge our customers, for sure. Another interactive question, are you ready? Who went on vacation recently? Lots of you, that's nice. Now I have some extra time. So you raised your hand. Where did you go?
Las Vegas.
Who said that? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, okay, Las Vegas, very good. How much did you pay in bed taxes in percentage?
Well,
Say no more.
I got a Hilton discount, so.
That's fine, but you still had to pay bed taxes.
I don't know.
Exactly, you don't know. Why don't you know? When you went to Vegas, and Vegas is a different story, but you went to Vegas, you're going to Vegas, right? Like you're going to Vegas. So it's regardless
I'm
of.
paying all the fees.
You're paying all the things, right? I know. So the point is, y'all can think to yourselves where you went the last time and try to remember the bed tax percentage that you paid. Most of you don't remember. The reason why is because you view that as mandatory. You don't see it as an optional thing to pay. So what we have found as a firm and through TID implementations, that there is little to zero pushback from the customer. Now there's a tipping point, and I don't want to downplay this. If we add fees, it adds to our pricing. There is a tipping point where too much is too much. What we have found as a firm in our research and through our work, that tipping point is about 20%. I think you all live somewhere south of that. I think you're very close to the average, which is roughly 15% throughout the country. Keep your existing funding. I just talked about that. So your baseline funding doesn't go away. This is a new supplemental funding stream and is required to be supplemental. We have political opportunity. We have some elected officials here in the room. I've been doing this work for 5 years. I have never seen more support for these types of mechanisms that I've seen today. What I think one of the silver linings of the COVID-19 pandemic was that it really showed how important our industry is. Industry is really important to our communities, to our workforces, and also to producing local sales and bed taxes. And so what we found is this is a request of the government that doesn't require resources. It doesn't require them to give us money. We're asking for a policy decision. And so because of that, what we found is there is a pretty warm receptivity to this concept. We do know that destinations that are well-resourced, they have multiple forms of revenue, fare better in their recovery efforts than those that did not. So the previous financial crises, 9/11, the Great Financial Crisis, those that were well-resourced fared better in their recovery efforts. This is a quote from Adam Sachs. He's the president of Tourism Economics. Tourism Economics is the leading firm in the country, really arguably in the world for the tourism industry. And when the pandemic hit, all eyes went to this gentleman. And this is a quote by him that I love. I think it sets the tone for this mechanism well. All of our forecasted scenarios are more to the non-negotiable assumption that travel will fully recover, the pandemic will end, the drivers of travel, income growth, demographic shifts, the importance of meetings, and the intrinsic value of vacation will still be intact on the other side. History supports the premise that recovery is inevitable. We teamed up with Tourism Economics. Feel free to scan that QR code to study TIDs. We know that these districts have been working and working well for the better part of 20 years. We know that because the concept keeps getting adopted in new places. And I mentioned that these are in place for a term. After the term is over, if you don't renew the district goes away and the assessment goes away. We have a 98% renewal rate on districts. So, and they have to be renewed by the stakeholders. So if they weren't working, they would not be renewed, and they certainly wouldn't be renewed at the rate of 98%. So we know that they work, but we wanted to put some data behind that. So we took a look in early 2021, we took a look at the top 100 destinations across the country. 29 of them have TIDs, and 71 of them didn't. So we took a look at the 29 cities that actually had TIDs out of that 100, and you can see the list in front of you, and you can see their states and their years that they implemented these districts. And the study will give you all of the statistics, but I wanted to highlight a couple for you. These cities that had TIDs produced a 2.1% lift over the cities that did not in hotel room demand, and 4.5% lift in hotel room revenue. If you decide as a community that you want to embark on this, you're not alone. We have 190, this is now 4 TIDs. Albuquerque, New Mexico formed late last week, being the first in New Mexico to bring us to 194, and that 18 states is now 19. We have very, very small districts. That we have one district comprised of one lodging business that self-assess themselves to pay for their own marketing efforts. Brilliant. And on the high side, we have a destination, San Diego, California, raising $41 million a year. I want to talk about San Diego, and not because San Diego is a relatable destination, because it's not. However, their story could be. About 15 years ago, they formed their district. Their district started raising yearly assessment revenues about $8 million every year. That is now $41 million every year. Interactive question, why? How did it grow so fast? Anybody have any idea? How did it get so big? 8 million to 41 million. Times 5. Some natural, right? They invest their money well, obviously. They do well. They did increase the assessment rate. And obviously as demand grows, supply grows, right? So those are some of the easy answers. But the real answer is these mechanisms are compounded because this is supplemental. Right now your bed tax is invested in a fraction into actual marketing efforts, there's an allocation to your CVB, but your CVB, your DMO, has other expenses. They have rent, they have staff, they have a number of things they have to take care of, and so they're not able to take all that money and invest it in room night generation activities. And so this money is 100% invested into room night generation activities, so what happens thereafter? It generates more TID revenue, and because the money is protected, it comes right back to you and you invest that again and again. It's compounding not just in TID revenue, but it's also compounding in bed tax revenue and sales tax revenues. These are the states that have active TIDs in blue. New Mexico is going to be blue on our next slideshow. The orange/yellow states are those that are moving forward with formations and or have enabling legislation introduced at the state level. This is a legal process. It requires a state enabling statute. We'll talk about that on the next slide. Virginia is gray. They just passed a state law but do not have an actual active district on the ground, but Richmond and Norfolk are both in their processes. I'm working with Louisville, Kentucky, and Lexington, Kentucky. Ohio, we call it the 3 Cs, are also working on theirs, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus, and so on. So legislation update. So the legal mechanism for forming. So Illinois does not have, nor does Iowa have an actual TID. So if you all were to embark on this, you might be in a race to be the first. We do have folks in Peoria and Rockford that are looking at this mechanism and have been working on prepping for it. However, we do have a couple of options. The first option is we do have an enabling statute called the Special Service Area Statute that does have some ability to do some assessing, but it's kind of limited. And so the CVBs and DMOs across the state have gotten together and decided that they would like to potentially write TID standalone legislation. That's why you see Illinois on the list. But you can see that you have a lot of friends that have actually drafted TID-specific laws. In some states, they have BID statutes, Business Improvement District statutes, that work for formations, and they don't need state enabling legislation. But in these cases, these states did. So the check marks are for those states that passed their successful legislation in 2021. I'm not referencing anything that happened prior to 2021 on this slide, by the way. Some case studies. Where has it been implemented and where has it been successful? I'm showing you a few cities, but we have a lot of cases, of course. But San Antonio implemented theirs in January 1 of 2019. I believe this deck will be available for you as well. I'm going to refrain from going through every single bullet, but they have an annual budget for their TID of around only $10 million. They have tracked their ROI, and as of the end of 2019, the return on investment for their expenditures was 46-1. Memphis Tourism, they formed theirs in 2016. It was because of a pre-planned bed tax diversion, so they knew they were going to lose money out of their tourism marketing funding and they needed to supplement it, so they used this mechanism to do that. They also had some convention center expansions that they wanted to perform, so they decided to raise their bed tax at the same time they implemented the $2 per occupied room TID. This is a quote by Kevin Kane. Kevin Kane is the president and CEO of the Memphis TID and Memphis Tourism. His quote, I think, is applicable whenever you add a fee or another charge to a hotel room night. Your hotel operators and GMs get very concerned, but if you can demonstrate to them that the return on investment is going to be such that it will be negligible as it relates to rate and will all actually allow them to grow rate, you will get their support and their trust. I think we've been able to do that, and I think most TIDs around the country have as well. Philadelphia. Philadelphia, I like to highlight, they have the only TID in the country that was formed specifically for groups, meetings, and incentives. They do not use the money for anything other than that. They depleted all their funds in 2017 after the NFL draft. They needed a new way to draw some events to their city, so they formed this district. They formed for the 5-year period, so their first term was 5 years, 2017, planned through 2022. They did renew they actually renewed in advance. They renewed in 2021, decided to extend it for 20 years and double the assessment rate. That was approved by the hotels. So they're at a 1.5 now. Their TID governing board will not issue any money out of the funds without proof of an 8-to-1 return. So they require that there's an 8-to-1 return on those funds before they'll issue them. They've had tremendous success, by the way. So how do you do this on the ground? What you don't see before step one is identifying legal authority. That's really step one. We're also in that stage where we are educating folks on this, and we'd like to feel your feedback. We'd like to hear your feedback and feel your temperature for this. But if you all decide you want to embark on it, this is the road you would take. There's a TID steering committee formed, essentially a group of hotel operators and owners that do guide decision-making as it relates to a proposal for a TID. So they get to kind of look at the landscape and say, okay, I think for our hotels, this assessment rate makes sense. These are the types of expenditures that we'd like to see. This is the governing body, proposed governing body. We bring that out to the community at large, and the community includes our cities and our hotels for feedback. We then bring the plan back, we make tweaks, we get it to the point where we feel like the community supports the initiative. Once we've done that, we go through an approval process with the cities respectively. There is a formal noticing procedure required, and there is a formal public hearing required, and generally a local approval process via a legislative body, so city council, etc. We have, for your information, I don't know if you know about this or not, we have our TID Summit. It's an online summit, by the way, April 28th, where we bring TIDs together and we talk shop, we talk about formation processes, but we also talk about TIDs that have been operating for a long time, what they've been doing, what they're doing with their money, how that's changing new and innovative ways to use their funds. And that concludes my presentation.